I'm trying to make a serious game for improving social awareness, and that in the domain of law enforcement, so for police interviews and street interactions by police. It seems to be the case that in Holland, cops don't try to shoot everybody on sight anymore, at least. They try to resolve conflicts peacefully, just by reasoning with them and trying to talk them out of stupid things, or just trying to calm down and soothe situations. So it's important that they get the right skills for this. And for that we're trying to make a serious game. And why do we do this instead of normal practice? Just well, what we envision is that you have interaction with virtual characters, and nowadays when police try to train their social skills, they're in a class with like 30, 40 people, and they have some professional actors which they hire for one day, and about 5 people get to train and the rest get to watch. So it's not a very interactive experience for everybody, and we envision that with at least a simple serious game you can at least get acquainted with some of these situations and try to resolve them successfully or unsuccessfully. So we're trying to make it more accessible for people to learn about this. And furthermore, the focus in serious games can also be on just experiencing stuff instead of performing, because you can imagine that when people have to interact with a professional actor, they try to do their best. But in a serious game, it doesn't count that much how much you do your best, because you can kind of easily restart the game and do it all over again. So you can also experiment with a serious game and with what happens when you don't follow procedure, or don't when you are not nice to somebody, and try to see how the conflict can escalate and try to learn something from that. And finally, what I'm working now is also to provide clear feedback to people who are interacting with virtual characters. So in serious game design, the focus is very much on the learning goals that you have. So for instance, you want insight into a certain procedure, you want to improve awareness, like in our game, or do you just want to experience all the interactions in a particular system, like in a physical system. And the key thing here is that what sets serious games apart from simulations is that you can have more playful interactions. So I would say, don't just simulate a world and try to have everything as realistically as possible, but also exaggerate certain elements. So abstract from the real world, and also try to convey knowledge using metaphors. And for that, I have a small example made by a company in Enschede with whom we are cooperating. It's a board game called Samenhangend, which is a nice play on words in Dutch, but not so in English. And then it's called Squacious. But the idea here is that you have 2 teams, the police and the juveniles, so loitering juveniles who are causing a mess. And one team tries to prevent the juveniles from grouping and teaming up together and try to getting them off the map. While the juveniles, of course, are trying to form a very large group and trying to drive the police away from this map. And a few of I wouldn't say techniques, but a few of the approaches that police can take in real life are kind of converted to game-ish rules in this board game. And one of the fun things is that police trainees in this case can also act as the juvenile party, so they can try to see things from another perspective, which might be very learnful. And well, I have to say, this isn't very much on the extremely serious side of things, but still it evokes discussion between people who are playing this game and trying to figure out different approaches to how they can scare away the juveniles or try to resolve things more peacefully. So this in itself is a nice example, I think, of how something seemingly non-serious can be quite successful in trying to make people more socially aware. So what we're working on now is a digital game called Loiter, and in this game you have interaction with virtual agents, and our idea is that these agents, these virtual characters, use theories from the realm of social psychology to determine their own social interactions with the player and between themselves. And in the end, we also have an emergent narrative here as well. So we're working on two types of interfaces now. One is supposedly more accessible, just simple 2D. You have these characters, they have different facial expressions, and you can just select one action that you would take. The other one is a virtual reality setup in which you wear a head-mounted display, so stereoscopic vision, and a suit that registers your body movements, so that you can really walk around in this world and try to see what everything is. Those are two different kinds of interfaces. But what we're very keen on studying is the behavior of these virtual agents. So we're trying to model social interaction, and to do so, we analyzed a corpus of video data of enacted police interviews, and we tried to build a semantic frame, so a collection of words that by itself could describe all the different situations and all the different tensions between the players, between the actors. And then we tried to determine which factors play an important role in these interviews. What we're trying to do here is go from practice to theory, to kind of a computational model of what is possible. So this is my social psychology side in one go. We came to the conclusion there are three large basic concepts that are beneficial to describe such a situation in police interviews. One of which is stance, describes the attitude someone has towards somebody else along two axes, dominance and affection. So somebody can be very dominant, not so affectionate with you, and he's very aggressive. Or if he's the opposite, then he's a following person. So different kinds of combinations can describe different attitudes between people. We also have the notion of face, like in losing your face. And people seem to have a need for autonomy, so for their own freedom, and a need to be approved of or to be approving of somebody else. That's also important to describe in these situations. And lastly, we have rapport, which is the feeling of being in sync with someone, so being on the same wavelength, that kind of idea. So we try to describe, using these factors, all the interactions in these police interviews. And from there on, go from theory to practice, which is a bit difficult still, because you can imagine that for each action that somebody can make, you can describe it in different terms of these factors. It's still a difficult step that we still have to make. So that's a bit work in progress. And what we try to do with the learning goals in our serious game is that we can base them on these theories that I just described to you. For example, recognizing what stance somebody has, so you can at least see in what kind of state he is, so you can adapt your own approach to the person based on that state. For example, by adopting a certain stance that kind of complements that same state, so you can get a better feeling of rapport. And for feedback, as I showed you the Fabula graph with all the causal relations between all the actions and goals, I thought that was very interesting, and I said to myself, okay, we can use this concept to build sort of an explainable artificial intelligence that can explain why it did certain things to the user in order to support the learning goals, of course. First is this kind of important model, which is the lambda scale model, and it says there are, again, two kinds of worlds, namely the game world, or the story world, that was in the virtual storyteller, and the real world, or the learning world. So what this model implies is that when you're playing a game, you're interacting with the system, but at certain key moments you have to actively reflect on what you're doing and try to convert this knowledge to the real world again. So it's really about experiencing and then reflecting. But as I said, the key question is here, at which moments should we do this? And if I'm correct, the next slide is about, well, yeah, I thank very much to last year's live action roleplay workshop organized by writers, because it inspired me to work or flesh out this idea in a bit more detail. I'm guessing most of you are familiar with live action roleplay. People are trying to enact a story in using physical interaction. The interesting thing about last year's workshop was that we also used meta techniques in this play. So normally you will also have alarms that are kind of strict simulations of certain settings. But what we did last year was also incorporating these meta techniques, which are ways to communicate out-of-character information to people. You can imagine that in a strict simulation of a story world, you cannot read someone else's thoughts, or you cannot go back in time and see what happened at a certain moment. But using certain meta techniques, of course you can. Like, you can have a small break in the play and see what somebody is thinking, and try to reflect on that. So these are techniques to enrich the LARPing experience and try to get more out of it and try to deepen the story a bit. So I found it very interesting, and what I'm now doing is trying to work out two such meta techniques. One of which is the act break. So what I'm envisioning now for our serious game is that there are different complexity levels for the interaction that can take place. So for example, first you have a situation that is a bit calm, it's not very, conflict isn't very extreme, so it would be a kind of an easy interaction. And the level after that, it would be a bit more difficult to handle this person. So between these levels, I'm currently working on trying to have kind of discussion between the character and the player in order to let the player ask this character, why did you do certain actions, and try to explain why he did what he did, of course. Like for instance, why did you say this thing? And then the character could explain this by saying, because you were acting aggressive, this made me introverted. So you can also explain this in terms of the social theories that we're using to offer these characters. And indeed, this is an example of the landscape model that says, first you have a certain play cycle, and then you reflect on this in between play. Continuing on this, this is only an idea, I think it would be nice to use this information gathered from this discussion to adapt the next interaction. For example, if a player asks a lot of questions about a certain part of the interaction, supposedly he doesn't really understand that part, so then you could adapt the next interaction to be, to focus more on that part of social interaction. But as you can see, this is kind of disruptive to the whole play of the serious game, because you really get out of the story world and you have to ask this to the character and stuff like that. The other method technique I'm thinking of is the inner monologue technique, which can provide insight into characters' minds. So, for example, in the form of a thought bubble, like you see in comics and games like The Sims, they can display just the current thoughts of the player, so the player can see these or request these, and then at least see what this character is thinking, and try to take that into account when he makes his next move. And this is less intrusive to the gameplay. At least that's what I'm hypothesizing right now. But you still have a play and reflect cycle going on. And this is where serious games can offer at least something different than just simulations, that they can include this meta information into the game. So the next steps for me are trying to figure out how much these meta techniques actually contribute to learning, because I'm hypothesizing that feedback is good, they should learn better. But of course I want to evaluate this with real users and try to see how this works out. And also an important thing I think is that to investigate how different interfaces can influence learning. as I showed you, the cartoonish one might, for instance, not be taken seriously by police trainees, and the 3D one might, people can get distracted by all the stuff that's going on and just be like, whoa, this is super cool, I've never experienced this before. So the novelty effect can take place there. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. At this point, we don't have a complete emergent narrative in our game, but we're working towards that. And as I said, another part, I'm trying to develop this to have the game adapt itself to the player, so to adapt the difficulty to the player's skill level in the end. My take-home message, I'm just saying be meta, so think about what takes place in your game and how people would experience this, and try to look at it from a different perspective. And also, but this is a bit a moot point, because I think might just ask everybody who is only working on one field. No, nobody is, so everybody is at least getting inspiration from other fields, so that's a good thing. And my last point is just to don't take everything too seriously. At some point you have to just build something and see what comes out of it. And I try to work from that, like in the misgenerated pirate stories examples. Like, just build something and try to see what comes out and work from there on and see how things can play out. So with that message, I would like to thank you all for listening, and I would welcome any questions and clarifications.
Could you just talk a bit more about why you put that stress on exaggerating and using metaphor and going beyond simple simulation? And the other question is, how much have you been working with the police and the people who are training police in these kind of techniques already, using role play and so on?
Things can be made more clear if you exaggerate them, because especially in games, when you make things too subtle, you would just have kind of a really strict simulation of things. People wouldn't get all the messages that come across. And that's the difficult thing in social interaction. So as a starting point, I'd suggest that you exaggerate things and let people really flame out just when they say something, which will make it more clear to the trainee, I guess. That's still to your second question, difficult thing in Holland, because I've been doing my PhD for 2.5 years now, and it seems that we finally made at least some contact with the police.
Okay.
And they're included in our project, but it's a bit difficult because we had some reorganizations and people got flown around things. But at least now we have some actual contacts, and we would like to at least give this game to people and try to get evaluated using them as participants. But I have to say that as far as I understood it, the theoretical part of the training of the police trainees is just like, people can be very dominant or they can be friendly, and that's about it. It's just 1 or 2 hours they spend on the theoretical part, and most of the stuff they learn just by accompanying at least some police officer, some real police officer on the street, and trying to see how he does or she does stuff. And that's all.
Right. I'm from the theatre world, right? So of course I've been working with improvisational theatre and also role-playing in order to make reflections or learn something. And I was just wondering, at this point with the artificial intelligence, how much, because I don't know the details about this project, so how much does it make sense to try and incorporate this into a computer system in comparison to having a real person standing in front of you, reacting, playing out those roles? How much does it make sense to make it a system? Is it really good enough to give something back compared to a real person? Do you understand what I mean?
Of course, at least in the near future, these systems won't be able to reproduce an exact future situation that you can have full interaction with somebody. That's what we talked about before, I guess, as well. So you cannot have a complete simulation or just a similar situation, but you can at least, well, let me rephrase this. I think the serious games can just be used to kind of level up people to a certain level. So at least get their basic understanding of some system to a certain level, and from then on try to train them further using actual, actor training or more practical framing. So it's just like a stepping stone towards other ways.
Yes.
At least that makes the whole curriculum of somebody more effective in the end and more efficient.
Yes,
Yes.
I totally agree. And as we talk about with Facebook and algorithms, and there is no question about the systems getting smarter and smarter and better at finding out the patterns and things about us. And on the other hand, it's of course still a system, so there will always be like details. And I was just curious. How do you, when you work with this, how do you see the possibilities of it? I mean, not in the far future, but right now, I mean, is it really that good that it's able to do something?
Doesn't it go back to the point that you were making about the fact that it can exaggerate or alienate or make strange things that might be missed in social interaction?
I think there's another aspect that maybe if you're looking at doing something as an educational tool, particularly if it's technology-based, what you're often wanting to do, which comes back to I think both questions, is simplify things. So you focus. You can't deal with it in the real world and learn everything at the same time because there's so much going on, it's so complicated. So if what you can do is abstract it and simplify it and focus on particular aspects of it.
Exaggerate them.
You're not pretending it's the same as the real world. So often if you use simulations of any type in education, you simplify them because you say, what is it I'm actually focusing on teaching here? What's the teaching goal? And then you might look at then how that might then, if there is any transfer of generalization, when you then say, let's look at it in something closer to the real world.
Yes.
But with technology in general, that's an issue, but it's also a positive. You want to simplify it in such a way as you may make it intentionally not a real replication. But I think throughout teaching you do that.
So it will always be a model and not the real world.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.